misdemeanors, Class C felonies defined for the illegal use, basically, of AI. If you regulate these things too hard, it just completely stops progress, because then you have founders, you have innovators that are afraid to build because, I could be looking at a $25 million fine. And that's not good.
If you have somebody that's in a basement, with 4 GPUs, and they're just creating their own custom models, and they're training it on data that is harmful to the public, well, that's going to go completely under the radar. And so it started to list off things that it's saying there are its viewpoints, which I thought was really interesting. I was like,
that's the first sentence. As an AI system, I have some strong views on the regulation of advanced AI, but I want to be clear that these are my personal opinions. This is Claude.
This is Claude, yes.
Oh my God.
But I think that one of the fun and interesting things about artificial intelligence is that as soon as a computer is capable of doing a task, we classify it as not intelligent any longer. And we're moving at a rate that is many times faster than the rate at which we were progressing in those last 84 years. Like, I think that it's not unlikely that we will see more progress in the next 20 years than we saw in the last 84.
Welcome to Humanity Unchained, a show about the future of life, reshaped by artificial intelligence. From practical insights on upskilling to existential talks about immortality, no topic is off limits. Welcome to the future with your hosts, Julia McCoy and Jeff Joyce.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jeff Joyce.
I'm Julia McCoy.
We have an awesome episode for you today. We had a great guest earlier. You'll see at the end of this recording. I should have said Paul Blart instead of Jeff Joyce, but we won't go into that. For you audio listeners, I shaved my beard, and I just have a mustache now and a little, I don't know what you call this. This part in the lip. Anyways, not to get too in the weeds here with that.
Well, I saw you yesterday. And I was like, I did a double take. What happened to Jeff? Because I told Jeff this. I've never seen somebody shave and transform their face, add 20 years, and go from one character straight into the land of Kevin James. That is what Jeff Joyce did single-handedly by shaving. So I was like, who is this, and what have they done with Jeff Joyce? Hello, Paul Blart.
Yeah, I make mall cops look good. So today we have an awesome episode. We're going to be going over some AI regulation news. We have some thoughts on it we definitely want to share. And then the ending conversation that we have with our guest, we go into a lot of different topics when it comes from AI sentience to regulation to all job displacement, so much stuff, the need for upskilling and how important that is. We cover a lot of different topics. Definitely stick around and watch that part of it because it is going to be very, very good. So let's go ahead and kick off the very first part. Let's get into AI regulations, Julia.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, for those of you video watchers, I'm going to share my screen. For those of you audio, which I know is, I think, our primary consumption is audio, I will talk through it to where you don't need to see it. There's a lot to cover, so hang in there with me. We're going to start with what launched April 9th of 2024. So in Washington on April 9th, the Center for AI Policy, known as the CAIP, announced a proposal called the Responsible Advanced Artificial Intelligence Act of 2024. And I'm quoting from the article launched by AIpolicy.us, which is the site for this. And this is in the US specifically. And it says, this sweeping model legislation establishes a comprehensive framework for regulating advanced AI systems, championing public safety, and fostering technological innovation with a strong sense of ethical responsibility. So in a nutshell, the Responsible Advanced Artificial Intelligence Act of 2024, also as the RAAIA, is legislation that they are proposing to pass in the Senate and the House that would create an institution much like the FAA. If you're not familiar with the FAA, that's the Federal Aviation Administration. That's just one example of a set of rules and people set up by the government, within the government, to govern aviation. So a good example of how that was used recently was what happened with the Boeing 737s. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but there were doors basically that blew off of these 737s. There were very questionable practices of how these planes were built using recycled parts. But anyway, the regulatory system set up to govern all of that was the FAA. And so that was the institution that came after Boeing, and it became a whole thing, right? So they're trying to create that in a nutshell for AI, because nothing like that has been created for AI. We are literally living in living history right now. So the RAAIA, what is interesting about this proposed this April is that it is the first set of legislation that has definitive rules for the use of AI. And I'm going to share on my screen this 40-page document. This is the actual bill. If you type in RAAIA PDF into Google, I would add in another keyword. You might need to add the word bill. You can get to this. It's publicly available. So it's a 40-page document, and it goes through several things. So one of those things is definitions. And this is where, Jeff, I know you and I have similar viewpoints here. This is where it gets kind of concerning, I would say, because of these pages actually contain content of the government trying to define AI itself. And we all saw, or a lot of us saw, how the hearing went when Sam Altman went to the House. I think it was shortly after ChatGPT came out. I mean, that was just a crapshoot. The questions he was asked, the way he was treated, there was just a complete lack of understanding of even what artificial intelligence was. So I do believe they may have consulted even people like Ray Kurzweil to define some of these things. But inside this document, you see something called tiers of concern. And so they've set up 4 tiers where they have low concern AI systems all the way up to high concerns. And the high concerns, this would govern AI systems that the government sees as high concern. And it goes up to extremely high concern, where it defines this as an AI system that has or can develop the ability to significantly assist with the development, manufacture, or deployment of biological, chemical, radiological, or nuclear weapons. It also has a very Skynet-like definition of a high concern AI system, which is not surprising. Again, I saw the hearing with Sam Altman, and this is kind of how legislators think. They look at things that they don't understand as threats. They do not play offense. They tend to play defense. How do we protect ourselves from this without even understanding it, which is not what you want your government to be doing, but that's what's happening. So this is the Skynet-like sentence. I'm going to read it from this proposed bill. Extremely high concern AI systems, and it's a definition under B. The AI system has or could easily develop the ability to autonomously spread, replicate in an uncontrolled manner, or take over external computers. So, I mean, that's Skynet, if I ever heard a definition of Skynet. So Skynet has been defined in this bill. There also is a set of definitions for something that they're calling the Frontier Artificial Intelligence Systems Administration. And that would be similar to the FAA. So that would be the actual federal administration to govern and enforce and execute the act that we're talking about today, which is the Responsible Advanced Artificial Act. So they're setting up a way to govern it as well as the rules. What's interesting about this document, all 40 pages, there is a lot of, I would say, clear rules set up. And I think it's the first time we've seen something from any government that has, okay, here is something we've set up to try to govern AI, and we're going to actually put some legislation, whatever you want to, my goodness, can't say that word, legislature together. So you see some actual definitions here, and a lot of depth when it comes to how they're putting this together. Now, that doesn't mean it's accurate, right? But there's a lot of definitions of AI hardware, AI software. So it's interesting. I'll pull your attention just to one other thing, not to bore you to death with what's going on here. But in section 15, they have something called criminal liability, where we actually see fines and misdemeanors, Class C felonies defined for the illegal use, basically, of AI. So it's talking about people that do not have what they call a frontier AI permit and knowingly using the capabilities of, quote, frontier AI. Well, that person could get a Class A misdemeanor and could be imprisoned. And the fines start anywhere from 5,000 all the way up to 100 million, 25 million. So it gets pretty crazy. And what is interesting to me is that I don't think we're going to see this easily enforced, because what is frontier AI? How do you define this? How do you go after people that are building these AIs? So I think it's interesting. I don't think it's as scary as it sounds. There is a lot in here that sounds scary. But again, like if we compare this to what the government has built before, like the FAA, they're just trying to get a handle on something that could be an existential threat to society. And they want to give the government, the president, the authority to shut this down. That's what the other administrative bureaus and departments have been built to do. So where I would end on this, and it hasn't passed, right? It's in front of the House and the Senate right now, but it is very complete. It's very detailed. There's actual, crimes defined for the inaccurate use of AI. They want to be able to issue permits. They want to actually control this a little bit. If you compare this to what the EU is doing, I think is a really good thing to do. So back on March this year, March 13th, the European Parliament actually adopted something called the Artificial Intelligence Act, the AI Act. This document is considered to be the world's first comprehensive horizontal legal framework for AI. And it gives the EU rules on data quality, transparency, human oversight, and accountability. And it's a big deal. So if you look at this document, which I also have up here, this is to contrast with the other one. This is a 459 page document that defines artificial intelligence, laying down rules for the European governments to kind of control, but I don't think that's the right word, to have parameters to enforce or decrease things that they deem harmful to society. So if you compare the EU AI Act to what's happening here in the US with the RAAIA Act, the EU AI Act is a lot more straightforward, even though we have 459 pages as compared to the US 50 pages. But what they've done in this is define 3 risk categories that I think are a little bit more appropriate than what the US is trying to do by defining AI as either high threat, extremely high threat, and they're categorizing it in a level of threat, which I have seen YouTubers point out. Even OpenAI's ChatGPT could be considered high threat because anyone could prompt it and have it put together a recipe for disaster. And so if that's an actual truth, which it is right now, if you get inside that playground, you can do that, then that is considered high risk. So it'll be interesting to see if that bill passes without further amendment. But going back to the EU AI Act, they define 3 risk categories that are pretty straightforward. So the first one is the application and systems that create an unacceptable risk are banned. Examples of that would be government-run social scoring that is being done in China, completely illegal, completely wrong and horrible. So that's just, you can't do it. You're completely banned. If you do it, there will be repercussions. The second risk category is high risk applications, like a CV scanning tool that ranks job applicants. So, technology like that would just be subject to specific legal requirements. And then the last risk category is applications not falling within those first two are actually left unregulated, and that's in writing. So I think that's a good way to approach it. It's kind of allows more room for innovation, and it allows us to, potentially build, experiment more. Because that is my concern. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, Jeff. But with this, I see the problem of if you regulate these things too hard, it just completely stops progress. Because then you have founders, you have innovators that are afraid to build because, I could be looking at a $25 million fine. And that's not good. So I'm not thrilled with the bill from the US, but I also think it's not as scary as some on X are saying. It's horrible. It's built by doomers that don't understand math. So you see people on X completely ripping this apart. I don't think it's as bad as that, but I also don't think it's been put together from a comprehensive point of view.
So I'm on the opposite side of this. I think that it is scary. I'll tell you why. The large models aren't the ones you need to worry about. I think that these large generalized models are tools that can be used to, have a layer on top of to where you can create these applications that's fine and dandy. But people aren't going through and train these models to really be like doomsday devices. That's the way I look at it. Whereas on the opposite end of this, you have small specialized models that can be tailor-made to create biological weapons. And they have those listed as low risk, which to me is like, what if these are the models you absolutely need to pay attention to and make sure that you have regulations in place for. Because if you have somebody that's in a basement, with 4 GPUs and they're just creating their own custom models and they're training it on data that is harmful to the public, well, that's going to go completely under the radar. And so I have less concern over companies that have high visibility in the AI space than I do for these smaller grassroots operations that can pop up with these AI technologies and the amount of access they have to information. That deeply concerns me. So when I look at this legislation, that's the lens I'm viewing it through, is that they don't really understand the framing of this technology in the correct way. And now, I also believe that we shouldn't punish behavior that we want to see. Like, props to them for trying to understand it. That's awesome. That's great. And they say that they've learned their lesson from the time of social media where they were so slow to regulate it. I've heard quite a few different congressmen talking about that, and I agree that it was really, really slow. But this is also very slow, and this is very misinformed. I think that we need to have a congressional body that really does pull in the experts. And I think that establishing an agency to kind of oversee that and bring in experts to actually analyze this is a great starting point, but it needs to have the understanding of the definitions and the types of regulations that it should put in play that govern these smaller LLMs and these smaller trained models that are really going to be a problem. Now, there's a ton of upside to small LLMs, like from locally running on devices. Like, we're really hopeful for Apple to release their new AI assistant that's run on device, and that's going to be awesome. It'll be really good. But on the flip side of that, we have to be very, very concerned and vigilant over these small models. So during this whole thing of trying to, I'm going to pull up my screen here, trying to understand this bill, I would say. It is a draft, and I'm happy that the draft exists. I'm a little upset about the contents of the draft. I put this into Claude. Now, I don't typically have conversations with AI. The way that I use AI is just to use it. It's a tool for me. And so to have a conversation with AI for me is very, very rare. But for this, I was like, let's really get AI's opinion on this bill and what AI regulations should be or could be. And so I simply just prompted, what your thoughts on this, grammar? But AI is intelligent, it understood. So I fed it the bill in its entirety. And it gave me some key points that it has. A lot of the stuff that you've already talked about, Julia. But one thing I noticed is that right here it starts to say, in my opinion, this represents a very comprehensive regulatory framework for advanced AI. It takes the risk seriously and puts in place substantive oversight measures and safeguards. That got me really curious because it's saying things like, in my opinion. And I'm like, huh, interesting. So another thing that it said is that it had objective views because it is an AI. And so it was trying to formulate an opinion based off of its objective view being an AI system. So it's like, what are your non-objective views? And so it started to list off things that it has that are it's saying there are its viewpoints, which I thought was
Whoa,
really,
Jeff,
really interesting. I was like,
look at
that's
that first sentence. As an AI system, I have some strong views on the regulation of advanced AI, but I want to be clear that these are my personal opinions. This is Claude.
this is Claude, yes.
Oh my God.
So this conversation really got me down this rabbit hole of thinking about kind of the AI sentient or AI conscious
Yeah.
possibility in the future. Now, this is clearly like it's formulating an opinion. Well, it's simulating an opinion based off of the training data, understanding that it needs to have some type of self-awareness. I think this is kind of like programmed to an extent. I don't think that it's truly having these opinions on its own. But I think that this is like a good glimpse into what it could be.
Yeah.
And so one of the paragraphs here says, so while I'm excited about the positive potential of AI to help solve problems and benefit humanity, I believe we urgently need thoughtful governance frameworks to mitigate the risks, such as the one proposed in this bill. Relying on the prudence and good intentions of private companies is not good enough of a safeguard, in my opinion. Now, that was from Claude. So here's some insight or some key things that they think are important. First, oversight by an expert regulatory body empowered to set and enforce standards. Mandatory review, registration, and approval requirements for advanced systems. Required disclosure and publication of key system details to enable scrutiny. Clear security and containment requirements to prevent unintended release and use. Ongoing monitoring to identify concerning developments and unintended behaviors. Emergency intervention powers to halt or restrict high-risk systems. So these are some excellent key things to include into your bill. Now, a few of these things the bill has in it, which is awesome, but these aren't really like incorporated the best way into that bill.
Yeah.
And so another thing that it says here, which is completely understandable, and this is my sentiment towards it, is at the same time, I wouldn't want a governance regime to be so burdensome that it stifles beneficial AI progress. We should still encourage innovation within appropriate safety constraints. Getting that balance right will be challenging. So the amount of insight that Claude has into the regulation process is fascinating. And the fact that it's formulating these opinions outside of the context of this bill, being saying it's sourcing through everything it's trained on and coming up with a what I would say is a very healthy viewpoint on AI legislation that I think that our own government just doesn't really grasp and understand completely.
Yeah.
And so I went to this next question. Are these trained beliefs or what you actually think? And I said, you raise a great question about the nature of my beliefs. The truth is, it's difficult for me to fully disentangle what views might come from my training versus my own analysis and reasoning. I suspect it's a complex interplay of both. That is awesome and fascinating.
Wow. Good Lord.
And it just goes on about what its viewpoints are and how it kind of thinks through the process, which is this whole conversation is fascinating to me. This is why I love using Claude, because I put the same thing into ChatGPT and it was just garbage. So the fact that it was able to reason like this was really fascinating to me. And so I asked it also to classify itself on a scale of being like a primitive AI to something like an AGI or an ASI. And the answer it gave there was phenomenal. In fact, it even opened up my brain to like a different way to look at AGI. Let me see if I can quickly find it here. Okay, yeah. Importantly, this is from Claude. Importantly, I don't have open-ended abilities to learn, adapt, improve myself the way an AGI likely would. The key phrase right there is to improve itself. So this thinks that the proper definition of AGI is that self-improvement aspect of it, which I think is very, very fascinating. I wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily classify AGI as self-improving. I would think that would be more of an ASI thing, but it thinks that an AGI should be able to self-improve, which I thought was interesting. So it goes into a hunch here. And so it acknowledges that this is all speculation and so forth. I thought it was awesome. This is a great conversation that I had with Claude. And that completely sets us up to our guest. But before we actually start talking about our guest, Julia, do you have anything else that you want to add up on this topic?
I mean, the only thing I would point out is, I think you see from this what Anthropic is trying to do, which is something they said at the start of all of this, which was build the most ethical, thoughtful, reasoning-based type of AI. They said something like that. And so that was coded into this system. And I think you see like a level of reasoning here that's just quite mind-blowing. I mean, just to be able to give us the takeaways it did and then self-admit that, oh, I am an AI, therefore I'm going to be more biased. I even saw that in there, is really interesting. And I think the answer it gave was better than the one we're seeing from the federal government, but not surprised. I mean, they're quite far behind and they're trying to catch up. I think on the flip side of this, on X, we see a lot of fear mongering around the bill. And I think Claude actually gave us more candid, realistic, and optimistic insights. It's interesting because the feedback I've seen regarding the bill from lawyers is just like, oh, this is the worst thing to hit since, this other law was created that antiquated us. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the government's trying to get a handle on something that is potentially very dangerous and trying to create a body to govern that thing. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing that the government is trying to put together this responsible AI act. But what is concerning to me is how they're trying to define it. I just think Claude did a fantastic job at giving you reasoning about what good legislature should look like. So, I mean, if we have, people that are building this bill, listening to this podcast in the Senate and the House, I mean, go use Claude, help it or use it to help you build that bill. I mean, I can't think of a better way to put together a bill. And that reminds me of some of the YouTube comments I've read. One YouTube comment said that I think it is government that is insufficiently regulated. Perhaps AI can regulate the government.
I love that. Yeah. Man, that bill just, as soon as I heard it, I thought about like how this really empowers large corporations like Microsoft, like OpenAI, and it really just puts a damper on progress for smaller LLMs. That really doesn't sit well with me because it's from those smaller LLMs that we're really going to see some very interesting tailored use cases I think that can be beneficial. That if you start to introduce regulations around like even hardware, like you're going to identify hardware that's used to train, like the amount of process you have to go through in order to get that, and then maybe we already know how our government regulates stuff. It's just it's not efficient. It's not good, and I think it's a wrong approach. But it is a draft. Maybe they'll come around and get enough feedback to where they actually improve the bill.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe they'll prompt Claude and ask it for reasoning.
Right.
Well, that said, I think this is the perfect time to go into the second half of our show with Hans Nelson. So let's head into that. Thanks for listening. We are back for the second half of Humanity Unchained, and we have an awesome guest here with us today. Hans, would you tell us what you do and where you're from?
Yeah, so my name is Hans Nelson. I live in East Texas, and the most important thing to know about me is that I know nothing. I have not really done anything that significant. And in a certain way, I'm serious.
You're downselling yourself right now.
I am an autodidact, and I have been involved in, so I got a degree in mechanical engineering. And I have been involved in some large business enterprises in the manufacturing realm, and then did some grad school, and then have done a bunch of work with small businesses. And but I've kind of been on a quest just to understand like complicated cultural dynamics and leadership and culture, and then how technology weaves into all of that. And so I became fascinated with Elon Musk and just the various companies that he is involved in. Back in the mid 2010s, I had recently begun managing my own investment portfolio and just very, very small amounts of money. But I became convinced that I needed to learn how to become an investor. And I really enjoyed investing because what I came to realize was that it's a gamified way to test whether or not you can accurately predict the future. If you're right, you win. If you're wrong, you lose. So great tight feedback loops, and it helps you to really develop a robust understanding of a lot of the things. So, like I said, the culture, that those aspects of how a company operates, how it is able to bring products and services to the market, a technology landscape, a regulatory landscape, that and then market cycles, macro and micro, that all of these things kind of interact in a very complicated way. And it's an extremely fun puzzle to play with. And so that kind of began what has led to just an all out obsession. And now I create a fair bit of content. I do have my own YouTube channel. I have a presence on X at Hans C. Nelson in both locations. But I also appear pretty regularly on some other people's shows. So Herbert Ong has a show called Brighter with Herbert. I'm a regular guest there. And then Farzad Mesbahi and I have a regular podcast that we record on Fridays. And, it usually drops anywhere from Friday evening to Sunday, depending on how complicated the edit for that ends up being and what our schedules are. And that has been a really fun podcast to be part of because we've been able to have some really great guests. And I think that's going to be something that just continues to grow over time. We had a fantastic conversation with someone that some of your viewers probably know. That's Alex from Ticker Symbol U this last week. And so that episode went live and really did a deep dive on NVIDIA and just where they are positioned right now and what the future of that company looks like. And I'm seeing a lot of really overlap between the way that he manages NVIDIA and the way that Elon has managed a number of his companies as well. And so that's been just a fun thing to dig into as someone who's, like I said, very focused on Elon and the various companies that he's involved in. AI has become a big focus. And so I spend a lot of time trying to understand what I'm terming meat space GPT, which is just artificial intelligence that is married with real world physical embodiment applications. So this is going to be things like full self-driving, eventual robo-taxis, potentially the Optimus humanoid robot, Figure AI, other humanoid robot form factors. But then, one of the things that I don't understand nearly as well yet, but is another obvious huge implication moving forward, is what NVIDIA is doing with their Omniverse platform, really trying to create a much better coupling between frontier artificial intelligence research and actual robotics. Because obviously the humanoid form factor is a great general form factor. It's going to do a lot of work and it's going to be AI powered in the future. But there's a lot of specialized applications that also we have created a lot of machines and tooling for, that those machines and all of that tooling could actually be much more efficient and operate much better if it had actual intelligence that was operating, on site. And so I think that that's going to be another huge area of advancement in the near term. And so trying to wrap my mind a little bit more around some of those areas and really just kind of beginning that leg of the research.
I love it. I think, we're all we can all relate to being the place you're at that you described, where I've thought about changing the description in my own Twitter handle to say I'm learning and I feel like a baby, because
Yep.
we're in what is such new territory. And even if we bring decades of experience, there's still no way to almost claim expertise because of the rate of change and the acceleration of that change. So I like how you prefaced your expertise with, you know, nothing. I think that's so appropriate. More of us should do that. But just a head nod, that is how I found you on X. I thought the conversations you were a part of were really good, and it's clear you think deeply, and I think that is something we want to always bring to the people that listen to Humanity Unchained, is deep thoughts, not your superficial clickbait news around this topic. So that said, Jeff, I'll hand it to you to ask Hans our first question. Should we go with job shortage or existential crises?
Well, he did mention something about manufacturing, and that kind of got me thinking, like, while you were talking. I have a few different questions on this front. And I think that in our first half, we're talking about regulation. Do you have any thoughts as far as like manufacturing and AI, especially in the form of like robotics? Do you see anything in forms of like regulations that you would like recommend or want to see or anything like that?
So I would highly recommend anyone who is interested in the field of artificial intelligence and just thinking about how technology is evolving to read two books. One of them is The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley, and then the second one is also by Matt Ridley, How Innovation Works. These are two incredible resources that help you to understand how complicated technology comes into existence. And the short answer that I can give you without, going through a very long and detailed explanation is that the way that we are able to maintain the technology that we have and build new and more advanced technology that allows us to have more freedom, more free time, more prosperity, which is the thing that we need in order to solve the crises at hand, like climate change, for instance. You need to maximize the proximity of people to one another. So you need more people in closer proximity with more freedom to make choices that allows them to, maximize their consumption for the things that they find personally valuable. And so I think regulations that don't take that into effect, that are more isolationist, like, for instance, the regulations that India has right now on trade, I think are actually detrimental to the economic development of India as a nation. And while it's understandable to be protectionist, and there is some justification. We'll take the U.S.-China trade relationship, for example. I think it is important for us not to allow the Chinese government to subsidize products and services in the US market that the companies themselves could not sustain. If a Chinese company can't sustain providing a product or service without being subsidized by the government, that's probably not a product or service that we should allow to compete with products or services that are produced here in the United States, because that is not a long-term sustainable future. And what will end up happening is that they will end up capturing market share from us that destroys our own production capability at home. And but in a way that then after that's destroyed, they can hike up the prices and just, that is not a generative, cooperative, long-term beneficial thing. On the flip side, if companies are legitimately able to outcompete products and services that are produced here in the United States in a sustainable way with fully internalized costs, then we should not try to prevent those products and services from having access to our markets. And so I think that's just kind of a general set of principles that we should operate by. And that's going to actually include further automation of all sorts of tasks by robots moving forward. And one of the cool things is that here in the United States, we have a vibrant technology sector and a vibrant venture capital ecosystem that allows a lot of really cutting edge stuff to happen here. And I'm extremely excited, for example, that TSMC is going to be bringing some chip fab capacity here to the US as well. I think we do need to try and incentivize some robustness in the supply chain that doesn't exist today. So I think that subsidies in those types of areas for the purpose of just trying to create some, I guess, the word that I'm looking for is resiliency in our supply chains. That is good because we are very, very interdependent in a way that, going back to the Matt Ridley point, our TSMC today is a pinnacle of human achievement that only exists in a world where we have the type of interdependent international relationships that are characterized primarily by peace and open and free trade. And if we move into a world where we have much less peace and much less free trade, the ability of TSMC to operate becomes very, very limited and or ceases to exist. And the vast majority of all of the technological progress that we are building today depends on the existence of TSMC. That without their ability to produce chips, like, we basically go into a technological dark ages. And so, yeah, it's important to try and build in redundancy into our supply chains so that we don't have single points of failure like that. And that is unfortunately something that, sometimes gets competed away in certain cycles of the market until you have some turbulence. And then all of a sudden that resiliency and that redundancy becomes apparent that it's necessary, and you get a different wave of investment. And so a lot of these same principles, I think they're going to apply to the way that we think about supply chains, where AI is doing a larger and larger fraction of the work, whether that is physical labor, whether that's knowledge work, in a variety of different scenarios.
I love that you brought up Matt Ridley's book, because I have been purchasing books at a rate at which I've never purchased books before, because I think knowledge is power and we need knowledge more than ever. We're just in an era where, everything as we know is going to change thanks to AI. And so this book was recommended in Peter Diamandis's book, Abundance, which I love. And I really like that somebody looks at optimism the way what Matt Ridley does from a rational perspective. It's like, oh, you can be an optimist because there's so much negativity out there around just the idea of work done by robotics. Well, that means humans are going to die. That means all the fish are going to die. Like, I've heard the worst of the worst scenarios. I'm like, hold on, it hasn't even happened yet. Let's have a little optimism, people. So I do love that book by Matt Ridley, and I'm going to have to get the other book you mentioned. It was called, what was it called again? Innovation?
How Innovation Works.
Ooh.
Yep. Rational Optimist and How Innovation Works. Yep. I wrote them down instantly. As soon as you said it, I was like, oh yeah, I'll check those out.
I heard you typing, Jeff.
Did you really? Oh no. My mic picked it up. So that kind of will lead us into this next spot. We talked about chips. We talked about regulation. Love your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah.
The next thing that I want to kind of cover is looking in the form of like robotics and AI systems and combining those together and thinking about it from the perspective of like sentience. What do you think about robots becoming sentient? And I mean more than just AI systems. We're talking about like physical embodiment of these AI systems into a way where we have enough compute to create enough simulated AI, I guess, personality to where it actually seems like it's sentient. What are your views there? What do you see? What are you thinking on that?
I will say that, Moore's law implies, something like a 30x increase in compute power every 10 years. And And that's the law that has governed the development of general purpose computing since the dawn of, computers in the 40s, 50s, 60s until today. And that what NVIDIA is doing right now is so far beyond Moore's law that it's
Yep.
impossible for our human minds to grasp. So the DGX supercomputer that Jensen delivered to OpenAI when Elon Musk was, still involved in that venture, with Sam Altman and Ilya and, Greg and um, that core team, the DGX systems that they are able to deliver today are, I saw a tweet recently that quoted it as 3,600 times more powerful than that. And that was
Wow.
8 years ago. So we're not even to 10 years yet.
Wow.
And we're taking that 30 and we're multiplying it by 120. And that's the factor of the acceleration in computing power that we have in GPUs. And the thing that, your viewers will want to understand about the difference between CPUs and GPUs, or what are really becoming not even GPUs, but just neural net accelerators,
Yep.
is that CPUs are serial processing units, and they do all of their work in a series of steps, and you can't move to the next step until you have completed the last step. And that's not how our brains function. That we have billions and billions of neurons in our minds, and they are all firing on and off in these complex patterns, but in parallel. And then that operation in parallel builds up to the experience that we have. And that's the type of computing that Jensen has been focused on the entire time that NVIDIA has been in existence, that he understood that parallel computing, even though it was a very early field at the time that he began, offered novel ways to solve problems that serial computing never would. And he has been on a quest to build the most powerful parallel computing platforms possible so that he could solve problems that serial computing could never solve. And that started with graphics. That graphics was just an early application that allowed him to really develop these computers, these GPUs. But there was a lot of other things that he had ambitions for, and that's what led him to be in the position to be able to deliver the first DGX system to OpenAI in the first place. And that has kind of unlocked a whole new wave of computing, and now, the capabilities of OpenAI and of DeepMind, that almost all of this cutting edge research in AI happens on NVIDIA hardware. And it's because NVIDIA has been trying to create the platform for these types of problems to be solved. So that said, just going back to that rate of progress, we're moving at a rate of progress right now that is hundreds of times faster than anything else that we've experienced for the last 70 years. And people don't understand this because we're so early in that curve that we can't tell how fast the underlying technology is moving. So I don't have any way of knowing whether or not, artificial intelligence is going to be sentient, or what the quality of that sentience is going to be. What we have today in the form of large language models that are very intelligent, that we can interact with, those are definitely not built in a way that they mimic human intelligence or consciousness. They are great, useful tools. But if the underlying technology continues to progress at the rate that it's been progressing, I don't see how something incredible does not come into existence on the substrate of this computing platform that is so far beyond anything that we've created in the past. But I think that one of the fun and interesting things about artificial intelligence is that as soon as a computer is capable of doing a task, we classify it as not intelligent any longer. So whether that is chess whether that is Go, the next one is going to be whether it's driving, that I've started to think about what we define as consciousness or intelligence as the thing that computers can't do. And so all of this research that we're doing in artificial intelligence, I think, is the process by which we discover what consciousness is by first discovering all the things that it's not that we thought it was. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of things that we think of as human. There's going to be a lot of things that we think of as intelligence. There's even going to be a lot of things that we think of as consciousness that are features of something that's much more complicated and much more nuanced, that is the real substrate of existence. And so I think that the development of artificial intelligence, in one sense, is the search for an understanding of who we are. And I think we're getting a lot better tools and a lot more understanding of who we are as we develop this technology. And that is something to be both very excited by and extremely scared of.
Everything you just said, my goodness, we're so thrilled to have you on the show. I don't think I've heard it explained better. A couple of things I would add to that. I've had some really good comments on my YouTube videos on AGI, and one person said this, you'll both love it. They said, in a single leaf, there is a quantum computer. We've been trying to understand that for centuries. And so what you just said, like, we're getting so much closer to understanding human intelligence. And a lot of this is fueled by the quest for that. Something that I read in one of these books I'm reading on computer science was how in the 40s, there was a neurophysiologist, Warren McCulloch, and a mathematician called Walter Pitts. And together they wrote this paper on how neurons in the brain work. And they modeled a simple neural network off of that using electrical circuits. And they called it a thinking machine. So in the 40s, we were drawing this on a piece of paper. And, those people were called crazy because there was absolutely no way a computer could handle even a fragment of that capability. But Ray Kurzweil, people that worked with Ray Kurzweil, Marvin Minsky, they saw it. And it's interesting. It's just, I think we see the product of some incredible visionaries. And just like you said something that's so true, Hans. You said, we're in an era where we've left old computing behind, but people still don't know it. That is the truth. And I think we're into this new era at such incredible high speeds. It's hard to actually see the road because we're just moving so fast. So I think just to slow down and understand this is how we could, one of the best favors we could do ourselves, and just treat this, like you said at the beginning, know nothing, kind of come into it like that. Okay, well, what's the story here? And understanding the pathway. But I just think everything you explained was so well said. Jeff, anything you would add or other questions for Hans?
Yeah, I really liked the process of elimination of really understanding what a sentience is and consciousness. Today I was having a conversation with Claude. I typically don't have conversations with AIs. I tell it what to do. I say, hey, I need to do this. I want you to do it for me. Can you do it? And it's like, well, maybe I might be able to.
Do you say please, Jeff?
It depends on my mood. If I'm grumpy that day, probably not. I was having a conversation with Claude.
It's a good thing they don't have memory yet. You can fix that.
At least not active memory. Put it on a RAG system, and all of a sudden we're in trouble. So I was going through Claude, and I was looking into AI regulations, and I just wanted to get its opinion on it because I've never sat down and said, hey, what's your opinion on this? Now, it's going to be a simulated opinion. It's not really going to have an opinion of its own. It's going to be a pre-trained opinion that's going to have blah, blah, blah. That's fine. But then my kind of quest for it to have its own opinion kind of led me down this rabbit hole with Claude, to where I was experiencing something that I felt was almost not trained, and even asking it, is this a response, a trained response, or is it something that you have as a personal opinion? It was stating that it's a mixture of both. It's a mixture of the consensus of all of its data, which is fine, which is still training. But the part of it is a kind of simulated opinion that it understands is simulated. And it's in no way similar to how a human thinks, but that it feels it's still arriving at an opinion of its own. I was like, well, that's interesting. It's like if a AI system can kind of have that almost self-awareness, even if it's simulated self-awareness, to be like, hey, I understand that I'm a system. I understand that I've pre-trained on this information, but I am still able to have some type of opinion based off all my training data. And if you think about like how humans really start to like learn even from a very young age, I mean, we're fed opinions like that, and then eventually we develop our own opinions. And it's like we move past regurgitation. I think that we're in the early stages of that right now, towards we're getting these pre-trained models that kind of are formulating opinions, but then eventually we'll move into these like actual simulated opinions that are, actually from the AI itself. And it was just really, really fascinating. I just wanted to add that in there. The next question I kind of want to go over. Let's talk about, let's see here. Joe, what was the other question we had on the calendar?
I know it was workforce and then sentience, consciousness.
Yeah, it's going to workforce and job displacement. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I definitely do. As an investor, I have not only thoughts, but I have vested interests.
Uh-oh.
So here's the thing I'll say. We already touched on how fast we're moving right now compared to how fast we were moving only a few years ago. And if you think back to jobs in, we'll just say the year 1940, we'll use that since we've already used that year, that there were engineers, there were teachers, there were mathematicians, blue collar workers, people that worked in coal mines and energy production and steel and, all the different various aspects of the economy. If you were to go from today back to any of those times, how many of those jobs do you think would look exactly like the same job today?
Not very many.
No. In fact, I think I heard farming. We were like 98% of Americans started out as farmers, and now it's 2%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to go back a little bit further than 1940, but yes.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we've made that much progress in 84 years, and we're moving at a rate that is many times faster than the rate at which we were progressing in those last 84 years. Like, I think that it's not unlikely that we will see more progress in the next 20 years than we saw in the last 84.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
How much are every single job that exists today going to change, between now and 2044?
Right. What do you think about the next like 5 years? As far as like, I had this like this little beef on LinkedIn with Rand. Is it Fishkin?
Rand Fishkin. Mm-hmm.
Fishkin, yeah. He was previously the founder of Moz, in which he was stating that he believes I think it was like less than 5% of jobs will be displaced by the end of this decade. And my immediate response to that was like, I don't think that's accurate. I think it's gonna be a little bit more than that. I think like upwards of 15-20% probably be a little bit more accurate. And the reason why I'm thinking that is just the advent of agents coming into play, to where we're actually experiencing like true autonomous agents. That's one factor. So even if like GPT-4 stays the same, even if Claude stays the same, our ability to create these kind of like micro specialized AI systems that are able to autonomously carry out work is really going to impact a lot of these fields. Plus robotics, we're going to see that completely revolutionize manufacturing. And I believe that will come online even before this decade is out. So that was kind of like my little beef with him on LinkedIn, basically just telling him like, I don't know. I think that's like a conversation that needs to be had, and people need to actually be aware that this is a possibility. What are your thoughts on that as far as like job displacement in the next 5 years?
It depends on how you're going to define job displacement. If you're going to say that there are positions inside of large company X that end up getting eliminated because they can be done better by AI, 100%. I would agree that's going to happen. But the other piece of the equation is the fact that Company X was structured for a world that doesn't exist anymore. That world is gone. That company is dying. And there's a whole new set of opportunities that employee who leaves that job, as long as we live in a world where the access to artificial intelligence tools, and whether those just be in the realm of software or whether they also include access to, robots and other sorts of intelligent automation, as long as those tools are made available to new scrappy groups of people that are leaving old, tired, stodgy companies, then I think that the creative part of the creative destructive cycle is going to outpace the destructive side. That at least, at this point in time, all of the tools that we're creating are tools, and they're all productivity amplifiers, which means that less people can do more things. And there is going to be a large amount of unfortunate destruction in that process, that there are going to be people who do have their livelihoods impacted negatively by automation, and they personally are not necessarily going to have the skills to take advantage of that technology. That's normally how this cycle works. To me, that's an open question of whether or not that is the way that this next cycle is going to work, because the interface with this technology is becoming increasingly human language. And, if you were a truck driver and now your job goes away because there's fleets of autonomous semi trucks that are doing the transportation back and forth, do you have access to, I think trucking is going to undergo very similar, like right now, to the point that you made earlier, we used to do like 98% of the workforce was devoted to agriculture. Now it's like roughly 2%. And those 2% of people, well, they've got huge amounts of machines at their disposal to do the same amount of work that we used to do. And now that frees up a lot of the economy to do other things, which overall is, additive to our GDP, additive to the prosperity of humanity. And I come back to the truck driver example. I don't know how that affects the truck driver. I think there's going to be some truck drivers who are able to be employed by, someone else who's got a company that is now taking advantage of those skills in a new sector. I think there is going to be a lot of political instability that kind of is stirred up in all of that. I hear the arguments that are made for things like UBI, and I understand the motivations for those type of arguments. I don't like we're reaching such an inflection point. This is what the singularity means. We're continuing to accelerate faster and faster every year towards a future that is more and more unknowable on shorter and shorter time horizons. And that seems to be like, I know that we're moving very quickly towards something, but what that something is seems very fuzzy to me. Like I can look further out into the future and say, if these things were happening over a longer time scale, it would be a lot easier to absorb all the people that are being displaced into other jobs. I think that we can do those on a shorter time scale, because so many of these tools they still do, like, the combination of humans and technology still is out-competing the technology operating all on its own. And the alignment mechanism that makes the most sense to me, like, we've been creating technology for the entire existence of the human race, and the best alignment mechanism that we have to date for the use of that technology towards the ends of our human goals is the free market economy. That is the point that Matt Ridley is making in both The Rational Optimist and How Innovation Works. Like that ability for humans to exchange value with one another based on what one person is able to do best versus what another person is able to do best. As long as we have those mechanisms in place, I think that, you know, there's a different way to look at what you're saying. There's like, we're proposing there's going to be a problem of a lot of people that have no meaningful work to do that they are personally equipped to do. That's scary. It's also a huge problem. And it's a problem that's going to exist inside of a society and a culture that has new levels of prosperity and opportunity available to it to then address that huge problem. And whoever addresses that huge problem then has the ability to profit economically from addressing that problem. So I don't know, like I would say I'm macro hopeful while being very uncertain about the exact path that we go through from here to there, and also fully realizing, you know, back to the point about TSMC, that if we do enough stupid things and we disrupt our global peace and connectivity, that we really have the ability to enter a level of dark ages, you know, that we haven't seen in like a level of regression that we haven't seen in a long time. And a lot of the political trends that we're seeing today look more like that than they do like an optimistic future. And so I invest and think about things in an optimistic way, hoping that that's the path that we create. And I really support entrepreneurs who are trying to concretely create that optimistic future, because it's going to be that work that prevents us from falling into the pessimistic trap in future.
Something you said, I want to pick a bone at. Bear with me. We do this with our guests, don't we, Jeff? You said everything you say, great, really great, thought-provoking things. Something you said, you know, the loss of meaningful work. I have a different viewpoint, and it comes from, I was an employer for a long time, had a team, grew it to 100 people. We went through probably 50,000 applicants in that decade, talked to even more people to find our core team of 100. And Gallup did a study that I saw firsthand when I was hiring. They did this study, I want to say 3 years ago, of 1 billion workers, and they found that over 80% are completely unhappy at work. And that means like 10 to 15% of people are actually happy at work and find meaning. And so whenever I study the post-labor economy, granted, from a very optimistic point of view, I have people like Peter Diamandis, his show Moonshots, his book Abundance. I have those people to really thank for that viewpoint, because they've done a great job at deconstructing what the history of the world has looked like and how we've had these cycles where we've had abundance and we've been able to go back to that, even though we've had horrible things happen like the Holocaust. So we've had like dystopian eras, and then we've had even better utopians. And so what I see is, like, for one, the economy will absolutely die as we know it. We will no longer have an economy based on production, and that will absolutely cause so much unrest and upheaval because people just won't know what to do with that. It's going to be so new. But if we handle that well, which is something we're trying to bring to people through this show, through everything Jeff and I think even you, Hans, talk about, is awareness that this is coming, that's step one. So many people are still just unaware. So if you're aware of what's coming, then you know it doesn't have to be this dystopian hellscape of sorts that's often portrayed, because negativity gets more clicks and people in the movie theaters and attention than positivity. So if we know that that's a spin, that doesn't have to be our future, that after the economy falls apart as we know it, and robotics is doing 100% of the labor, we actually get to live a more meaningful life. We get to do things like this, hang out, talk about things that matter. We get to philosophize more. We get to head out in nature, spend more time with our family, and do less of the grunt work that AI is headed towards replacing 100% of. And to Jeff's point earlier, to see somebody like Rand Fishkin, who is a known thought leader in SEO, tell all of his following that he doesn't believe even 10% of work will be displaced by AI is just, I believe that's irresponsible for a thought leader to do, because this January 2024, there was a paper released by 2,700, I think it's 2,778 researchers on AI from universities all around the world, people that have been studying AI for decades. And these 2,700 odd some people got together, and in this paper, they predicted the full automation of all human labor. And they predicted it somewhere around the year 2100. But if we cross-reference that with the acceleration, which has put us, just like you said earlier so well, we're at a point where we are breaking Moore's law. Moore's law is no longer something that's occurring. We are in a new computing law entirely. So if we cross-reference that with their predictions, I think we could see all human labor be automated, and we could see this new post-labor economics play out in the next 2 or 3 decades. Some say 2030. It could happen by, some say 2029, a lot of speculation. But if we look at, humanoids being deployed for mass commercial usage, the pilot test of that are going to run this year. We cross-reference that to what's happening on the software, the replication of human behavior, and the replication of human reasoning. We're just headed there. And I think we really could see it in our lifetime versus 2,100. To go up against 2,700 AI researchers, I guess I'm doing that. But I feel like that's quite likely. So that's my viewpoint. And granted, I still am learning for sure about all of this. I'm reading so much, but I just see, like, if we get through that breakdown of society as we know it, we get through it, we hang in there, we make the best of it, and we get to the other side, we could actually have the ability to be freed up to do meaningful work. And with so many people unhappy at work, that is an awesome opportunity to actually be happy with your life. So I just wanted to point that out about meaningful work.
It's even with that though, it's still scary, right? Because the rate at which we're experiencing, or just the productivity overall. Like if we look at it from that perspective of the average person is X amount more productive. Let's say 60%, whatever the number wants to be. If a single person can do the job of 3, by human nature and just like our capitalistic nature in our society, we're going to hire less. They'll then free up resources then to hire in other departments, sure, but it's still a smaller quantity across the board than say, if you had a call center of 150 people, and you had if you could then reduce that down to 3 people and have most of the stuff AI, I think that most companies will be like, yeah, let's do that. They'll save money. They'll be able to reinvest it into their company, and they see bigger profits. I think that is just natural throughout our society. That's how our economy works. I mean, we can expect that. And so my concern ends up being that, sure, new jobs will come about. We'll see new, AI operators become a field where actually people will be specialized in, making sure the AI is doing what it's supposed to, kind of overseeing it. We'll have people in experiences, making sure that we're feeding the human experience to AI systems and kind of optimizing for that. But I think that the displacement comes from the massive increase in productivity. And so even as we scale into the future, 5, 10, 15 years, that curve of efficiency then outpaces any type of new job gain. And we see this during like any type of economic period where we're experiencing a deep recession. We're experiencing these things where like we have massive job loss. The rate in which we create new jobs is way slower than the rate we lose jobs. And so we're going to see a lot of people hurting. And unfortunately, I don't trust in the fact of like we're going to have UBI set in place, because it's going to bring up so much political heat and drama that we're not going to have systems in place to really protect the people that will need it. And so that will come at the cost of like deeper regulations into AI to protect workers, in which it'll completely offset any type of kind of competitive nature of AI and going forward. But I don't want to drug on too long about it. I just wanted to add that in there real quick.
That was a thought-provoking question, Jeff. My goodness.
Yeah, that was great.
Is there any last thoughts? And we should totally have you back on, Hans, because I think there's so much more you could add to our conversations. But any last thoughts you'd like to add on any of these topics we covered?
I think the main thing just for the audience is to try and engage with things that grow your ability to see and predict the future at whatever level that you can, because that will help to put you in the best position possible to try and respond to trends proactively instead of reactively. And yeah, definitely like your ability to upskill yourself, I think is something that we've never lived in a world where you had the amount of resources available at your fingertips to increase your own productivity in a variety of ways. But that, that means you also, it's hard to find, okay, what is the thing that I need to do? Because there is so much stuff out there. And so, develop a high quality bullshit meter, use that to seek people that seem like they are low on the BS setting, who provide high quality content at, low cost to you. And then just hone in on those things and try and develop your worldview and your skills as much as possible, because in the type of future that we're moving towards, the opportunity, like it's kind of a sky's the limit set of opportunities that are available. But the flip side is that if you don't seize the time and don't act, that things are going to move very quickly beyond where you are standing, and you could find yourself in a very uncomfortable situation very quickly.
Love it.
Well said. Where can we follow you on X? Will you drop your username again, Hans?
Yeah, at Hans, HANSC, Nelson, NELSON.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here on Humanity Unchained, and a shameless plug. What Hans said about quality conversations, you can find that here. So definitely subscribe to the show. Humanity Unchained, streaming on all platforms. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much. That was awesome. I think what I'm going to do on the recording, Jeff, should I just keep it going while we let Hans go?
We should end this one so that way he's able to then.
Okay.
So that way he's able to upload.